How can we overcome the disconnect between our Sunday faith and the rest of the week? Every week, join me, Brendan Romigh, and Dr. Bob Robinson as we discuss the joys and frustrations of reintegrating every aspect of life with our faith and interview thought leaders and practitioners who are doing it. Bob is elderly, and I'm a young man in my 20s, so we offer an engaging dialogue from different generational vantage points. If you desire insights into how to live an integrated Christian life, one in which you can better experience Jesus Christ and participate in what God is doing in the world, this hopefully is the podcast for you. This week on Reintegrate, we bring Vince Bacote as our discussion guest. Vince is an Associate Professor of Theology at Wheaton College and is the director of Wheaton's Center of Applied Christian Ethics. He's the author of several books, including The Political Disciple, A Theology of Public Life, and a book based on his doctoral dissertation on Dutch politician and church leader Abraham Kuyper's insights into how the Holy Spirit guides Christians to take their faith into the public sphere, titled The Spirit of Public Theology. He is now editing a 20-week series on Christianity Today on their website titled The Race Set Before Us, featuring 20 Christians of color addressing racial justice and what the church needs to know about it. He received his PhD from Drew University and has a Master's of Divinity from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Bob, isn't that where you got your master's degree?
Yeah, and so don't hold that against Vince or me. Yes, but Vince, thanks for coming, Vince. And Vince and I knew each other back at Trinity, at TEDS, we called it. We were living on the same dorm floor, and I can tell you that Vince entertained the socks off of me as. Hi, Vince. Welcome.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Brendan. It's great to be with you. And yes, we lived on a truly iconic floor. No question about it.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
Lots of hijinks and very funny people.
Yeah.
And Vince got me going more than once. So it's good to have a good friendship with Vince for years and years, and it's good to see him thrive at Wheaton College and to be able to use his wisdom and his ability to connect with. He lives well in a white world, I'll say that, and. And so being able to help Christianity Today with this edited series is awesome. In the first article that came out on June 19th, Vince had an introduction to the series, and you said, I propose we begin not by asking why talk about it. The reasons for conversation need no explanation. Instead, let's delve into deeper questions. What are some of the deeper questions that white evangelicals need to think about?
Among the ones that I wrote were, one, do I really know everything that there is to know about this? And is it possible that I have a kind of default setting given to me by an ideology? And a longer way to put it would be to say that allows me to automatically capture and frame everything about this conversation and neatly put it into one basket or another. Is that possible that's the way that I respond to that?
In a world of Google and people thinking they know everything about everything because their tribe has told them how to think about things, that's a good question to ask. Do I really think I know everything I need to know about this subject matter?
Right. I think it's very important to ask that because a lot of times what happens in these conversations, whether they're in person or perhaps especially on social media, what happens is you wind up getting almost more rather than inquiry and seeking to know, you get more assertions about what is already known. And the assertions go back and forth. And a lot of times on this, people are making assertions about things like systemic racism isn't real. If you talk about social justice, you're a Marxist. You know, things that where people are already sure that they have a very clear idea of the totality of what is meant. So that's a really problematic thing. And I'll say it's equally problematic, by the way, if somebody just assumes, well, these white folks are just, you know, a bunch of people trying to protect their privilege and prop up a capitalist system that keeps them in power, right? I mean, that can also be a way that someone is sizing the situation up very neatly, when, of course, seeing is that people have different experiences and different perceptions and different educations and different dispositions. There's all kinds of reasons why people use the vocabulary that they use. So if we're not doing the work of getting to know each other and find out what is meant when people say various things, then it will be very frustrating. You have to be willing to understand that in fact, I'll use a Brian Stevenson phrase. You have to get proximate. You have to get near to people. And you have to get proximate for a long time. Because when you're there for a long time, then you begin to understand what people's experiences are. And at least in people's, I think, communities, or even in this world of, people being made closer by technology, there needs to be a willingness to, in some way, sit with the experiences of others rather than just being sure because a pundit told you what it is, that you know, that you can explain what is meant when someone talks about race or privilege, etc.
Well, you said that Brian Stevenson said we should get proximate.
Yeah.
And that in order to, what I'm understanding you to say is that white evangelicals need to change their experience, get closer to people with these different experiences. We're living in a white church, in a white community, working with white people.
Yes.
It's very difficult to become proximate.
Yes.
And
Geographic proximate will be a problem.
Right.
But here's what you can do, though. You can cultivate a disposition that would incline you to be proximate if you had the opportunity, rather than would incline you to just be comfortable in the experience that you have, and to then evaluate other people and to say, I've never seen what you're talking about, and therefore, because I haven't seen it, it's not real. A lot of people are saying after with the protests and everything that have happened, they're saying it took you seeing a video of somebody dying or getting in the condition from which they would later die, seeing somebody in this, almost 8 minutes of having Derek Chauvin's knee in George Floyd's neck. It took that for you to believe what we've been telling you for years. Okay.
I think for a lot of white evangelicals, that's the case. But a lot of us we just haven't experienced this in any way. We're not even close to proximate to any of this.
Yeah.
And so what we see is what the media is trying to tell us.
Right.
What we see being reported on the news cable channels, right?
Right.
And we're being told, this is what you need to know about this, and this is what you think about this.
Yeah.
But depending on your news source, that would be a different thing, right?
There's no question about that.
If you're listening to conservative news sources versus more liberal news sources, there's a different narrative to all this.
Yes.
It becomes very confusing, and most of the people I talk to, they realize how the media slants things, and they're not ignorant of that, and so they're trying to say, well, how do I decipher through all this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's what Daniel Hills talks about in his book Wide Awake. He calls this disorientation.
Yeah.
A time where whites are just like, you're asking me to feel guilty about something that happened to somebody else by somebody else, and for a whole history of racism and the subjugations of African Americans, when I personally have never subjugated any African Americans. So why am I supposed to feel guilty? This is the kind of things I'm talking to folks about, and
Right.
And I don't know how exactly to answer that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, what I would say to them is, do you want people to care about abortion? Because you might not know anybody that's had one.
Mm.
Okay. Do you need to know somebody that's had one to care about it?
Mm.
Right. I mean, you say you just know the facts about the numbers. You may have no personal experience at all. You may not even know what's involved in the procedure. But somebody told you should care about it. So because they told you and you trusted that voice, you said, okay, I should care about this because it's about life. Somebody else tells you about their life after being born and things that are going on with it. And then you say, well, I'm not sure that that's a real experience.
Hmm.
You haven't seen that experience, one experience you haven't seen, and you are pretty sure it's not real, or you're not, or at least you're unsure if it's real. Another experience, you haven't seen that either. You've just seen some numbers. And maybe you've seen people march on TV, or you've heard about it on a radio program, but you know nothing about the actual experience, about the lives of those people. But absolutely, you think, I'm so passionate about this. There are lots of other experiences of other people's lives that you care about. You care about religious freedom. You may not have ever experienced any discrimination on the basis of being an evangelical in working in Silicon Valley or something, and then feeling like, you know, you've got to be an undercover Christian to survive in Silicon Valley because, you know, it's so secular and so leftist, etc. It's like, well, do you know anybody that works in Silicon Valley? Or you just know what somebody reported to you? Of course, another question about this has to be, because we're talking about race, is maybe you're nervous about caring about it because you may have to question yourself. Because you may have to look in your own heart and ask, is it possible that there are ways that I've been able to kind of be comfortable with kind of Christian that I am, when I have in a very subtle way thought, well, I'm not like them, you know, and I'm responsible. I'm sorry, they're so irresponsible. It's like when people say things about, why don't black men care for their children? There's a CDC study that says, actually, even when you have unmarried fathers, and you certainly have that in the African American community, 60% of African American fathers are present to their children, and that's great. That's a greater percentage than other groups. So it's a mythology about them, about where all those fathers go. Don't get me wrong, the broken home stuff, all that stuff is still massively problematic. But the point is that somebody trots that out as if, you know, those people just can't even manage to be responsible about anything. So it's all on them, right? And you go, well, if they got themselves together, we could all just, you know, go play golf or something. It's like, well, you know, maybe talking about this makes you have to ask, maybe there's something I'm unwilling to acknowledge, because it might be pretty ugly if I acknowledge it.
Do you think perhaps a big part of the white evangelical reluctance to take a more active stance with the racial issues that we've been dealing with, even, I'll say, for the last 10 years, even since the coining of the term Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that reluctance is rooted kind of in this fear of disrupting what's already comfortable for them.
I think for some people that is part of it, right? But again, if most people are in situations where you're not interpersonally or with minorities,
Right.
There's not something that impress itself upon you to care about that as much as some other things. Because what's been more prominent for evangelicals is, what are we going to do about abortion? And what are we doing about sexuality pre-Obergefell, and then post-Obergefell, what's going to happen in terms of laws about other accommodations around sexuality? I mean, those are legitimate concerns. So and I think it's really important to note that the point is not, if you care about race, don't care about other things. There's a lot of things to care about. Do you care about the environment? Do you care about education? Do you care about public health? I mean, we could keep calling the roll about all the different things to care about. Do you care about artificial intelligence? Do you know what transhumanism is? I mean, all this stuff really matters. So we need to care about those things, but I think there's a way that the question of race can sometimes be just a potential powder keg within for people. I'm nervous about having a conversation about this, because if I do, people might get angry. It might devolve, etc. So my response is, you're right, it might. But then what I would also say is, who do you think should be the people that actually decide to pick up the pieces when it devolves? Should it be non-Christians, or should it be Christians who are doing that? And the thing is, it's really hard and messy and long and like lifelong perhaps to really work through it.
And this is kind of a general premise for any human being in our society.
Yeah.
But then there's this extra layer as followers of Jesus Christ. It's like, what's a distinctly Christian framework that would give us insight into why or how we should address racism?
Yeah. Oh, you're asking me.
I'm asking you. You're the expert.
Well,
you're the guest.
Oh,
Brendan could give us his, but I'm really not interested in hearing.
Are we all experts? So I would put it this way. This is sort of shorthand way of putting it. God has not given up on his world. The world that he made, he has always wanted humans to be those who are ruling his world well. Even with the fall, people are still supposed to rule the world. It just got complicated. Christians are people that are made alive by God. Because they're made alive by God, they're the ones who can see and understand that God wanted things to be this way. So it's always incumbent upon Christians to be asking, how are we engaging God's world well? Not because we're trying to do something triumphalistic where we think we see so clearly that if everybody just took all their cues from us, the kingdom of God would be perfectly manifest. I'm not post-millennial in my eschatology, so I'm not going there. But I think there is the fact that we're supposed to have a committed engagement in the world where we are seeking the good of the world, the common good. And that common good on the question of race cannot be addressed if I'm not inquiring about, for me to be somebody who stewards the world well, because stewardship is ruling well in God's world. How is my stewardship of this world, of this created order, how do I do this well when there are people in this world who are experiencing, at the very least, the effects of centuries of policies in our country that made them, by law, discriminated against. So how do I help their experience in the world to be one where they're more oriented towards flourishing? Am I willing to actually ask that question rather than say, I really want to make sure that those people prove to me that what they're saying is wrong, is really wrong?
That's a different framework than what many evangelicals think. I mean, most of our theology is based on personal salvation and personal piety.
Yeah.
And the thought is, if we want racism to be eliminated, we need to change people's individual hearts.
Yeah.
We have blinders on. We only see personal piety and personal salvation as what the gospel is about. And you kept on flinging this word around, flourishing, as if that's the gospel, Vince. And that's not the gospel, right? I'm just
Well, all I know is that Jesus was incarnate, which I think means that it's like echoing what God said in Genesis 1:31 about his creation being very good. And God has never abandoned that first commission that he gave on page 1. It's often a forgotten Great Commission, but that's one dimension of what it means to live well in the expression of our discipleship in God's world. It's not like you have to choose either personal salvation or caring for God's world. You can care for God's world without worshiping God's world. So you can care without being worldly, right? You can be stewardly without being worldly in that negative sense. And an interesting thing about the personal salvation piece, Bob, is that I would just ask people to talk about being personal salvation, say, can you tell me how that worked out in most of the history of the United States of America with all the whites who they had this personal salvation? How did that help them with the way that they saw minorities? Because it doesn't seem like it worked out so well. Just, a kind of trickle-down theory of addressing racism just by individual conversions hasn't worked. I mean, yes, please, people be converted. People need to be reconciled to God through Jesus. Yes, but, there's no instantaneous sanctification. In my editorial on CT, I say that there's no one experience that's like a shalom pill. Right.
So it's fascinating.
I mean, go ahead, Brendan.
Good.
I'm going to say there's a level of irony, too, when you think about it, that historically, the epicenter of institutional slavery and historical racism in our country, not that there aren't aspects of racism absolutely everywhere, but obviously historically the Deep South, where slavery was so prevalent and culturally ingrained, is also known as the Bible Belt. And it was also an area that was very much predominantly Christian the entire time that the institution of slavery was the norm. And
yes, there you should. People thought that it was proper because of a what I'll call a peculiar reading of Genesis 9, because there is no curse of Ham. The curse is of Canaan. That's what the text actually says. So the idea that, well, because of this curse, nothing positive would ever emerge from, the children of Ham. It's like, well, ancient Egypt was pretty impressive, it was a pretty sophisticated place. So it's ancient Ethiopia, right? So I think for some people, it's really hard for them to know what to do with that,
That's the whole issue now with the Confederate flag and the Confederate statues. And now they know, General Lee, I saw a depiction of Lee in a stained glass window in a church in the South. It's like, what? But
he's revered in some places.
So, but it's interesting. I like that. Now they know.
Yes, I say that about Kuyper all the time. Now he knows, because he wouldn't have imagined that somebody like me was going to write something, write doctoral level by him. Bavinck might have imagined it, but Kuyper, he did not know what he did not know about, people that were not European. I mean, he never says anything positive about people of African descent.
Yeah, so you're a black man who is a Kuyper scholar, so that's kind of, I'm sure you're asked about that all the time, right?
Oh, yes. Why are you just studying him? I'm like, because of what he said about public engagement was pretty good, and also because even within his own theology are the seeds for undermining the claims that he made about black people. And the way I put it is that he could not live up to the implications of his theology. He could not transcend the gravitational pull of his cultural commitments.
As most of us can't, right?
It's hard. It's hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why when you're talking about race, people need to ask, is it possible that there are cultural commitments that I have that I just take them for granted? And because I take them for granted, it doesn't even occur to me to say, hey, God, are those cultural commitments potentially idolatrous? Are they at least misleading me, perhaps? Are they leading me to be untruthful in the way I regard others or regard something that's going on in the world? Am I unwittingly committed to those things as much as I claim to be committed to you? I sometimes ask students when I'm talking about the role of context in influencing theology, I go, how do you know when you're saying more about America than you are about God? How do you know when you can tell the difference? We all have to ask ourselves that. I mean, anybody, no matter what your race is in the United States, you've been here long enough. I mean, you breathe this environment of, you know, hey, land of opportunities, self-determination. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why, at least in the United States, part of the intensity of protests comes from the fact that our documents talk about this possibility of achievement, no matter what you came from in terms of social class or whatever. You can make it in America, right? And when that's the case, and people are like, I'm not, you know, that's not happening for me. Then I ought to be able to get that.
And the presumption is if you aren't able to get that, there must be something wrong with you, not the system you're in.
Potentially, or there's something wrong with the system. I mean, 'cause I think there are a lot of white people who say there's something wrong with the system. I mean, part of the reason why I think you have the appeal of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016, even though their policies were different, was that there was a populism that they appealed to, that people who used to be able to, say, get a job working for GM, and that was a ticket to middle class, maybe even upper middle class. And now, you know, automation and all these other things changing that. What about me? Right? And both Trump and Sanders said to those people, I see you. Now, and they both also said some version of they being they in some kind of system are against you, I'm for you. And they have very different ways of saying how I'm for you. But people felt seen by them. Right? So because the system, whether it's a system from the right or from the left, is against you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things to mull over. And I mean, I personally will probably be listening through this one again just to pick apart everything that was said and really make an effort to take it to heart.
Well, I hope it's helpful for listeners. So.
Well, for the listeners, be sure to log on to ChristianityToday.com and look for the series of articles that you've been editing that come out every Friday, right?
Yes, it's called Race Set Before Us. Yes.
Oh, isn't that cool?
Yeah, wasn't my idea. Play on words, right?
Play on words.
Looking at race set before you, and then running the race. So,
was there any? Have you already lined up all your writers?
Most of them are lined up. We're still trying to finalize a couple of things.
Okay.
Yeah, but next article Friday.
It's fun to write. I used to edit articles for the High Calling, and it's a lot of fun to be able to procure great writers and to read their stuff and to work with them and making it the way it should look for the publication. It's one of my favorite jobs I've ever had was editing. Have you enjoyed that?
Sometimes editing's fun. Sometimes editing is, you're like, okay, is editing rewriting, so.
Yeah, that was the thing. I always, I'd write back to the author saying, I don't want to lose your voice. This is your voice,
Yeah.
But
right.
there's got to be some changes here, buddy.
Right. Right. Yes.
Oh my goodness. So good. Well, thanks.
All right.
Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good night.
All right. I will. Great to meet you, Brendan. Great
Yeah,
to see
great
you, Bob.